What's up, Scampers? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to go over the basics and everything you need to know about the plumbing in a Scamp trailer. I'll cover the difference between having full hookups and boondocking. And I'm going to do a deep dive into the water heater, so stay tuned. I'm covering this topic as a special request from some viewers like you, so if you have anything you'd like me to cover, just go ahead and put it in the comments and I'll try my best. Now that I have my campsite set up, let's talk about hooking up the trailer. The campsite I'm at right now currently has full hookups. It's got power, sewer, and water. So I'm going to start with that scenario where you've got full hookups. We'll run through everything, and then I'll do a second scenario where you're out boondocking, which means you have no connections at all. And we'll talk about how things differ. As always, everything that I use, all my accessories, will be linked in the description below. So if you need any of these items, you can find links directly to what I use down in the description. But let me show you how I hook things up. The three things you're going to need to have clean, safe drinking water at a campground are a drinking water specific hose that you only ever use for potable water. You never use to flush anything dirty. A water filter, because campgrounds can have some questionable water. And you need a water pressure regulator. This is super important because the pipes in the Scamp are fragile. They're not metal like you have at home. So if the pressure coming out of the spigot is too high, it can burst the pipes in your Scamp. And it can start leaking in a place that you can't see, and there might be a ton of damage before you notice. So you never want to go without a water pressure regulator. That'll stop the high pressure right at the spigot and protect the pipes in your trailer. I just want to demonstrate real quick how high the pressure can be coming out of these spigots at a campground, just to really reiterate how much you need that water pressure regulator. Ooh. That's crazy. That's intense, right? You don't ever want to put that much pressure into the pipes in your trailer. They're made out of PEX. That's not good for them. So you never want to camp or hook up without a water pressure regulator. With that pressure in mind, I want to show you how I hook things up. I actually start with my water filter first because it can slow down the flow quite a bit on its own. And I don't want my pressure regulator first and then my water filter. And now it's too slow and I've got curry pressure inside the Scamp. So I do the water filter first. And then I do the water pressure regulator. A lot of people do this the other way around. They'll go water pressure regulator first and then the water filter, but I like it this way because you get all that pressure to push through the water filter. It's not slowing it down. And then the water pressure regulator still stops the pressure before it even enters your hose, so you know your trailer plumbing is safe. Then you want to attach your drinking water specific hose. And I really like these 0G hoses because they're super lightweight. They'll never kink. They're really easy to roll up. You can throw them basically anywhere. So, and they have these spinning rings on both ends. So it makes it really, really easy. I like 0G a lot. So I have the 25 footer. They come in 50, but I've never needed 50. I can usually get pretty close to the hookup. So I've got a 25 foot 0G and that goes on next. Make sure it's nice and tight, and then I'm going to find my city water hookup on my trailer. Scamp makes it super easy. They have the city water connection labeled, so if your trailer doesn't have that and you're unsure, the best way to tell is to look at it and see if it's something you need to screw a hose into. You want to think about that screwing motion and associate that with the pressure that's coming from the spigot, because that will actually go directly into your pipes and bypass your fresh water tank. So you don't need to use your fresh water tank or your pump. So if you think about it, the reason you're screwing it on here is because so much pressure is coming from the spigot, you have to get a nice tight seal. But then since you know there's that much pressure, you know you don't need your water pump to create pressure. So when you have city hookups, you want to be able to screw your hose into your port, and you want to remember you don't need your water pump, because this will go directly into your trailer with all the pressure I just showed you, bypassing your freshwater tank. If you do mistakenly open your freshwater connection, if it isn't labeled or you get confused, you'll be able to tell the difference. You can see it's just this big open hole. That's the one you stick the hose into and just fill your freshwater tank. There's no way to create pressure here by screwing your hose into it, so that's how you can tell the two apart. The freshwater tank, you just insert your hose. The city water connection, you have to screw your hose on to get a tight seal because of the pressure. Now I'm all hooked up. I've got my water filter, so I know I'm getting clean, safe drinking water. I've got my water pressure regulator, so I know my pipes are safe. I've got a really tight seal on both ends of my hose. It's time to turn the water on and see if anything leaks. Looks good. I don't have any leaks. The water's fully on. If it was spouting anywhere, chances are it's the washer. So if you're getting a lot of leaking or spraying when you turn everything on, you probably have a missing washer or an old cracked washer. So that would be the first thing to check. And I always carry extra just because it's a thing that happens and I hate wasting water. So if you're getting leaks, check your washers. With the city water connection, there's not much more to it until you want to heat water and have hot water. As I discussed, the pressure is coming from the spigot, so I don't need to have my water pump turned on at all. I can turn on my faucet. I've got plenty of pressure, even with my water pressure regulator on. So you'll notice some air came through the lines first, and then once I turned everything on, I had plenty of pressure. No water pump is on. That's basically it until I want to heat water. And that city water connection is plumbed to my toilet, to my shower, to my outdoor shower. So once I'm hooked up like that, all I have to do is turn my faucet on and I've got running water. The only other thing to note is that if you have a shower, you still need to turn on your drain pump. You don't need your water pump to push water into your pipes, but you do need to use your drain pump to drain out of your shower basin. So that is the same whether you have hookups or you're boondocking. You're going to need that drain pump to get water out of the basin in your bathroom. The next thing I like to do when I have hookups is to run some water into my toilet. I like to put about a gallon or two of water into my black tank just to help break stuff up, and you want to condition it with something. These were a gift, so I'm using these right now, but I prefer Happy Campers. It's a powder that you have to measure, but it's got the best odor control I've ever used. But for now I'm using this one, so I'm just going to plop one of those in the toilet and run some water in just to help break up any solids that might be in there and just give it its best chance for flushing everything thoroughly when I'm done and I dump my tanks. And the last thing to note while we're in the bathroom is that the shower has a shutoff switch on it. So it's got a little stopper, so if you want to take a navy shower, you can press this and you won't lose your water temperature. You'll just stop the running water. Then when you click it back on, it should still be the same temperature. So you don't have to turn the knobs off every time and disrupt your temperature. You can just hit the little stopper, stop it, hit it again, it'll come back on. So that's a really convenient feature. So if you've got this little knob on here, that's what that's for. Same thing goes for your outdoor shower. If you got the outdoor shower, you can always stop the water without adjusting the knobs and then just start it right back up with the push of a button. Then the next part of the equation is we're getting fluids into the trailer. We're going to have to get those fluids back out of the trailer. So this is where the Stinky Slinky is housed on my 2023 model. And these lids are known for coming off on the highway and letting your hose fall out. So I use a couple of these O-shaped carabiners just to keep the lid on and make sure I don't leave anything on the highway because I'm not a fan of littering either. So once I get that out of there, you can take out your Stinky Slinky. And everybody wants to know, do I hook it up to the gray tank or do I hook it up to the black tank? Because on my 2023 Scamp, they're actually separate. Normal RVs, they have them both together, they converge, and you just have two separate valves. But on the Scamp, the gray tank is all the way back here, and the black tank is up at the front underneath the toilet. So your gray tank is everything that goes into your drains. So think your kitchen sink, your shower drain, anything that goes down the drain is going to go into the gray tank, and that'll go here. So your gray tank is way less gross than your black tank. Your black tank is everything that goes into your toilet. So that's all your sewage. So gray tank in the back, the black tank's up there. You can see the little pull valve for it up there if you look close. Boop. So if you've got two waste ports, but you've only got one hose, which one are you supposed to hook up to? I like to put that on so nothing goes in there and makes a home out of it. So if you've only got one hose and you've got two waste ports, which one do you hook up to? The answer is not the black tank. You do not want to leave your sewage valve open and draining while you're using it. And I'll tell you why. There's a thing called a poo pyramid in the RVing world. And that happens when you are putting solids and fluids into your black tank, but you're leaving your valve open. So all the fluids can run out without breaking up the solids. So the solids will just pile up in a pyramid and not get broken up or flushed out and become a solid mass that is awful, clogs everything. You don't want to do that. The best way to avoid that is to leave your black tank valve closed while you're using it. Let it fill up with solids and fluids, and then when you pull it, the fluids will help flush out the solids and you avoid the poo pyramid. So take it from me, you can leave your hose connected if you want, but don't ever leave your black tank open while you're using it. Wait till it's full or halfway full or you're ready to leave, and then pull it all together so everything will flush out. Trust me on that one. And kind of the same thing goes for your gray tank, just not as severely. If you're not cautious about getting food particles down in there, they can get stuck in the bottom of your tank if you leave your gray tank valve open, and it can cause smells and be a little bit nasty. So I kind of like to do the same thing with the gray tank where I let it fill up and then flush it out. But you can leave your gray tank connected. I know a lot of people do leave it open, but if I was going to hook up my slinky while I was at a campsite, I would only hook it up to the gray tank until I was ready to flush my black tank. Then I would move it over. So it's really easy. Just pop it on there, twist it on. You don't have to twist it insanely tight. You can just make sure you get a good seal. You want to be able to get it off later, but these things they'll latch on. You don't have to go too crazy. Once you have this connected to your trailer side, you just got to find the hole in the ground for the sewer at the campsite. This is what the sewer connection will look like at most campgrounds. It's just a PVC lid that you open, and you'll almost always find some rocks around it. And that's great because when you put your slinky into the hole, you want to make sure that when you pull it and all the water runs through, it doesn't slip out and make a mess. That's disgusting. Nobody wants that either. So you get your slinky in there and you can place a rock or two on it. Just avoids making a mess. Gives you extra reinforcement. Never a bad idea. That'll kind of keep it connected in there and it won't pull out even if a ton of fluid comes through it all at once. So now we've got our clean, safe drinking water coming into the trailer. We've got a better understanding of how to get those fluids out of the trailer. But until we need to make some hot water, those are the basics of the plumbing in the Scamp. So let's do another scenario where we're off the grid, no hookups, no water pressure. All we have is what we cart in with the trailer in our onboard tank. So now that we're going off the grid, we're back at the fresh water tank, the one on the back of the trailer that you just stick the hose into. I still leave the water filter connected no matter where I fill up my fresh water tank. It keeps the gristle out of your tank, which really helps your pump function better. There's a filter in your pump to help keep the gristle out of your the machinery in your pump. But I like to help it out and not have to clean that filter frequently. So I still use that same water filter even when I'm filling up my fresh water tank. I don't need the pressure regulator because we're not creating pressure. We're just inserting it into the hole, filling the tank. It'll fill all the way up. It'll run until it's full, and then water will shoot out of this little part right here. So that's just the way to know that it's full. So if I was going off the grid, my instinct would be to fill this at home or somewhere where it's super convenient, but Scamp recommends that you don't fill your water tank and travel long distances with it. The straps that hold the tank in reportedly get busted, and it's a lot of weight in the back of your trailer. If you think about the fact that each gallon of water is roughly 8 pounds, a little more, and this is a 20-gallon tank. That's a ton of weight to put in the back corner of your trailer. That is a really hard load to balance out. So it might actually give you trailer sway. Worst case scenario, you could get into an accident. So it's definitely wiser to try to fill up your water close to where you're camping. A lot of campgrounds will have a spigot where you can fill your trailer on the way in, or if you're going somewhere super remote, you can just find a gas station or something nearby. You've got your water filter, hook up, fill it as close as you can to your destination, and then close it up. And then you just have to think that the only water you're going to have for the trip are the 20 gallons that you put in your tank. Now that we're off the grid and we only have the water that's in our freshwater tank, we have to use our freshwater pump. That pressure that I demonstrated coming from the spigot before isn't there. So something needs to pressurize your pipes to push it through your faucets, or nothing's going to come out when you turn them on. So that's what your freshwater pump is for. When you click that sucker on, as soon as you turn on a faucet or a shower or something, water will come flowing through, because the water pump will automatically turn on and create that pressure and push water to all of the open faucets. But something to note is that if you're like me and your freshwater tank is empty at the moment and you're hooked up to city water, the city water completely bypasses that freshwater tank system. So if I turned my pump on and it was kicking on for some reason and was trying to create pressure when it's dry, that can actually damage the pump. So you want to remember, you only need the freshwater pump when you're pulling from your freshwater tank. You don't need it when you have the city water connection, and you don't want it to turn on and do damage to your water pump. And something else I want to mention while we're here at the control panel, this is my freshwater tank gauge, this is my gray water tank gauge, and this is my black water tank gauge. So you can tell I've used my toilet. I haven't really used my sinks or faucets very much, and there's a little bit of fresh water left over from some adventure somewhere. If you come back here and this just is all garbled, right here next to the freshwater button on my 2023 version anyway, there's a secret button. If you press and hold that, it'll reset this whole thing and it'll start making sense again. So fresh, gray, black. So until it's time to dump my tanks, that's pretty much the basics of how the plumbing in the Scamp works. So let's move on to the water heater, and I'm going to go into as much detail as I possibly can on this one because my 2023 Scamp has the Girard Tankless Water Heater, and I have had a hard time finding any accurate information about this thing. So I've compiled everything I could find. I'm going to do my best to make it simple for you, but if I get some of this wrong, just know that I've read the manual. I've found as much information as I possibly can, and there just isn't a ton of helpful information out there. So I'm going to try to make this video that, but if I get some stuff wrong, please be gracious with me. I'm not an expert in this subject. I'm just doing the best I can to make this easier for everybody else. Gosh, that evening was just too beautiful to waste, so I'm back at it. Let's do Water Heater 101. My 2023 Scamp has the Girard Tankless Water Heater. You can find your model number right here on your water heater, as well as a bunch of safety information on the water heater itself and on the door. So if you find yourself up a creek and you don't have your manual, you can check all the literature that's attached to it. But this is a Girard Tankless Water Heater, so if your Scamp has a tanked water heater, things will be a little bit different. But I'm going to talk about this one because it's what I have on my Scamp, and I'm going to do a step-by-step tutorial, and then we'll discuss some troubleshooting. The very first thing you're going to want to do is turn on the switch that's on the water heater itself. So the straight line means on in Scamp lingo, and the circle means that it's off. And also note this fuse that's right here because we'll talk about that later. But that's the very first thing you do. You just switch this on switch to the on position. So step one, make sure your switch is in the on position, and we'll go inside and do step number 2. Oh, and real quick before we head inside and talk about the next part, there are a couple basics we should cover while we're out here. This water heater runs on propane, but it also needs electricity. So the combustion from the propane is what actually heats the water. There are electrical components like the fan and the igniter. So there isn't a pilot light that you have to light. It's an electronic igniter. So if it's functioning properly, this thing will light itself. You don't have to stick a lighter in there and try to light a pilot light. It's an electronic ignition. But it also needs plenty of battery power or electrical hookup to run the fan that's in there and the motorized portion of this water heater. So you do need plenty of propane and plenty of 12-volt power. And lastly, this little exhaust right here can actually get really hot. So you never want to put like a camping chair or anything flammable or meltable right up against it because it'll get hot. So think of this as like a no-fly zone. You don't want to put anything here, lean anything against the trailer, or sit in front of it in a chair. So before I head inside to turn it on at the control panel, I just want to make sure that my propane is on. This water heater needs propane to function. Next, we'll come inside to the control panel. You can see the red light is on. That's how I know I've switched it on outside. If that red light bothers you when you're trying to sleep, you can kill the switch outside and that'll turn it off, but then you'll be turning it back on every time you want to use it. So I just leave it and put a little piece of electrical tape over it or something if it bothers me, but it's not as bright as a battery monitor, so it doesn't really bother me that much. But once it's on, you can set your temperature, and this will go all the way up to 124, which is where it'll max out, but the manufacturer recommends that you leave it at 115. And we're gonna go over why and some benefits of that a little bit later. But that's the next step, is you come inside your trailer and make sure you turn it on inside the trailer at the control panel as well. Now I can go ahead and turn on the hot water and get some water running through my pipes. And with the water running, you'll notice 3 icons pop up. You're gonna have one icon for water flow, one icon for motor control system, and one icon for the burner. And if you'll notice, it takes flow to get the temperature to start rising. So these are not based on pressure. When people say, oh, I have too low water pressure for my water heater to work, it's not water pressure that you need, it's flow. So depending on the flow rate, the more the water is moving through the water heater, the more it's going to heat up the water as you use it. So let's talk about some different methods for use. There are 2 ways you can use the tankless water heater. You can use the mixing method, kind of like what you do at home, where you set this thing up super high and then you use the cold water and the hot water at the same time to get that perfect temperature that you like. Or there's the set temperature method, which is kind of why the manufacturer recommends you leave it at 115, because that's basically the right temperature for most people for washing dishes, hands, or taking a shower. And when you leave it set at 115, it'll regulate the temperature. It might go up to 116, 117, but it'll basically hover right around 115. And you can just use the hot water and leave it on while, say, you're taking a shower, and that keeps the flow rate moving through the water heater itself consistent and high enough to keep that temperature stabilized. So if you're using the cold water and hot water and the mix method, you might have a few more fluctuations in your temperature, like while you're showering. If you switch it off using that button I showed you, and then you turn it back on, there's less hot water moving through the water heater. So you might have a drop in temperature right when you turn that water back on. And then it takes a while for the water heater to get it back up to your desired temperature. So if you use the set temperature method, the water will stay more consistently around 115 or whatever it is that you set it to. So that's what I prefer to do. I set it at a temperature that I like. And then when I want hot water, I just use the hot water either on the faucet or on the shower, just to keep that consistently warm water and a good flow rate running through the water heater, so the water stays consistently at that temperature that I like. That's the way I like to do it, but either one will work. So with these tankless water heaters, it does take a little bit of water running through it to get it on and on long enough that it actually starts getting warm. So it's not even warm yet. It's starting to warm up. I might even have the water too low. I can add a little more flow. That'll get it to kick on faster. And now it's starting to get warm. So that takes a while, and that's a lot of water to waste if you're boondocking. Here I have full hookups and a sewer connection, so it's not a problem. But if I was boondocking and I only have those 12 gallons in my tank, that's a lot of water to waste. So that's another reason I like these collapsible bins that I'm always talking about, because they fit right in the sink, and you can turn the water on and you can capture all that water while you're waiting for the water heater to kick on and for the water to get hot. So then I can use that water and put it in the toilet instead of running the water from my freshwater tank to get that gallon or 2 that I like in my toilet to help the conditioner and help break up the solids. So I could use that water and put it down the toilet. I could take it outside and use it for hand washing. I could give the water to my dog for drinking water. So These bins are great if you're boondocking. That would be a hot tip that I have for you, is to just capture that water instead of running it and wasting it, because that's going to use up your fresh water really quickly, and it's also going to fill up your gray tank really quickly. So if you can capture it and use it elsewhere, even if you're just using it later to put a fire out, there's no reason to waste water. So capture it with one of these guys, take it out, put it on the table, use it for something else later. So let's do another example over here where you can see what happens with the temperature when I turn the water on. So you can see that it turns on, the motor's on, the flame kicks on. So as soon as the flame kicks on, the temperature starts rising, and it'll go all the way up to whatever I have it set to and hover there. But you can see that it takes a minute to get there. So that's why I suggest capturing that water if you're boondocking, because that's a lot of water to waste, and that's precious when you're out somewhere where there isn't any more. So I don't usually use my water heater when I'm boondocking. I just heat water on my stove if I want hot water for dishes. But if you do decide to use your water heater, just keep in mind that it takes a significant amount of flow and water through the water heater for it to get up to your desired temperature. So those are some of the water heater basics and some tips for use when you're camping with full hookups versus boondocking. But let's talk about a little bit of troubleshooting. There are some ways that this can get wonky, so let's go over a few common scenarios that might help you out when you're out camping. Something to consider is the temperature of the source water. This is not a tanked water heater, so it doesn't just accumulate a ton of water and heat it up and then push it through. It heats it as it's running through the water heater. So if your source water coming in from the spigot or from your fresh water tank, wherever you're drawing your water from, is super duper cold, you might need to use that max temperature setting to get it to a more desirable temperature. So if you're camping in the winter, you don't have to worry about the water heater itself freezing. It's got an anti-freeze mechanism built into it that if it gets too cold, it'll turn itself on and run itself for long enough to warm up. So you can use this in at freezing or just below freezing temperatures, but you want to consider that the temperature of the water source is going to affect how hot the water comes out of your shower and your faucet. If you are using your water heater in super cold conditions, something else that helps is a lower flow will actually let the water get hotter. It'll spend more time in the water heater itself getting hot. So if you have a really high flow, it's going to move through the water heater faster and it's not going to get as hot. So if it's really cold source water or your ambient temperature outside is really, really cold, a lower flow versus having it on full blast will let the water get hotter before it gets to the sink. Another thing you can do is to turn off your other high draw propane appliances. So I would turn off my heater and make sure I'm not using my stove, and that'll give my water heater the best chance possible to get that water hot in really cold conditions. So that's something you can do if you're finding your temperature is still not warm enough. So if I'm out camping and something goes wrong with the water heater, I have kind of a process to troubleshoot it. So this is what I do. I start outside and make sure that the unit is on. Obviously it has to be on to be functioning. But I mentioned the fuse earlier. Anytime something goes wrong in an RV, a good place to start is to check your fuse. There's a control panel inside that has fuses and breakers for everything in the RV, except for the water heater. The fuse out here is the fuse that you want to check. You just unscrew it, and it's this little guy in here. These don't go bad very often, but like I said, anytime something that goes wrong with your RV, a good place to start is checking the fuse first. So if your fuse is still good, you'll move on to the next thing. Once you're certain that your water heater is on and the fuse is good, if the lights don't come on this control panel, then your next problem is likely your battery. This takes 12-volt power to operate, so you got to keep that in mind if you're boondocking, that you got to keep your battery charged enough to do this, or you got to have electrical connections. So if this is not turning on, chances are you don't have enough battery power. So that's what I would check next. And just for reference, there's a small fan in the water heater that won't turn on when the battery's low, and the unit won't turn on if the fan's not running. So you got to make sure you've got plenty of power to operate your water heater. So if I'm troubleshooting and now I know it's not the fuse, the water heater's on, I've got plenty of battery power, or I'm hooked up to electrical, the next thing I would think about is the flow rate. The water heater needs a certain amount of flow to kick on, as we've discussed. I think it's 3 liters per minute or it won't turn on. So if you've got hookups and there's not enough flow, again, it's not pressure, it's flow coming from the spigot outside, or you don't have enough water in your water tank when you're boondocking, then the tank won't turn on. It needs to have enough water. So if those things are both good, you know you've got a full tank of fresh water, or you're connected and you know there's plenty of flow like I have at my campsite right now, then there might be trouble elsewhere in the line. If you're using your fresh water tank, there is that little filter that I mentioned earlier in the video that's on your water pump, and if that gets gunked up, it can slow the flow rate enough that your water heater won't work. So I might do a whole nother video on the water pump later, but just know that you might need to clean your filter on your water pump to get enough flow rate, and you have to make sure you put that back on. If you take it out and clean it, you can clean it with water, but make sure that you put it back on, because if it clogs up the flow meter that's in the water pressure, so there's a little device that measures the amount of flow, and that's how it functions. So if that gets clogged up because you forget to put your filter screen back on your water pump, then the water heater won't run at all. So you want to make sure that you don't have any clogs down the line and you've got plenty of flow. If all those things check out, then the next thing I would consider is that gas could be the issue. Sometimes you get air in your gas lines, just like I got air in my water lines. So an easy way to bleed your gas lines would be to turn on your stove and just let it run for a little while. And that'll make sure you get enough gas going through, that all the air bubbles are out that could affect the igniter in your water heater. But something to think about is you need to have enough propane in your propane tank to run your water heater. So the stove may be lighting and running, so you might think, oh, I have plenty of gas, my stove is lighting, gas can't be the problem. But the stove only uses probably around 8,000 BTUs, and the water heater uses over 42,000 BTUs. So there's a pretty big difference. You're going to need a lot more propane to get your water heater running than to light your stove. So even if you've got enough gas to light your stove and your stove is running, you could still be too low on gas to get your water heater to work. So that would be the next thing I would check, is to make sure I have enough propane in my propane tank. And lastly, if all of those things were checking out, I would check the circuit board on the water heater itself. This part comes off and there's a circuit board behind it. And if the circuit board is working, there'll be a little green light that's on, and that'll tell you if that's working or if something has gone wrong with the circuitry. So that would be the last thing I check. I don't like to open this up. I like to keep it clean, keep it dust free. So if that's a problem, you can pop this open and there'll be a little green light, and that'll tell you if it's a circuit board or not. So those are the steps that I would take in that order to troubleshoot my water heater. But let's talk about error codes. You can get error codes that'll pop up on the screen right here. And the most common error code that pops up is error code 1. If you get that one, you're either low on power or you're low on propane. So you would want to check all the things that we already discussed troubleshooting. You want to make sure you have a good flow, plenty of gas, plenty of power. If you get an error code 1, one of those three things will likely fix it. If you get an error code 2, everything that I've found in my research indicates that that could be the gas valve. You might actually need to replace the gas valve on your water heater, but all of the error codes will be in your manual. So I like to carry my manual with me, so I always have that information. So when I'm out in the middle of nowhere and have no internet, I have all the information I need. So check your manual for your error codes, but error code number 1 is the most common and pretty much an easy fix if you know what to look for. Those are some basics and some tips for your water heater. I hope that helped answer some of your questions, but it's time for me to hit the road, so I need to dump my tanks. That's the last step in this process. Let me show you how I like to do it. I've been camping and using my black tank, filling it with sewage, and I've been using my gray tank, filling it with water from my faucets and my shower. So I like to do this from dirtiest to cleanest. I start with the black tank and dump that. That way, when I move over to the gray tank and flush that, it helps to clean out the hose, and all the gunk that came from the sewage kind of gets flushed away with the gray tank water that rushes through it. So I'll start with the black tank. You just unscrew the cap under here. Make sure you've got a nice tight seal. And then insert the hose into the sewage dump on the other end. And it might be a little difficult to tell on camera, but this campsite is actually running uphill from my trailer to the drain. Once I get this inserted and make sure it doesn't go anywhere, the contents of my black tank are still going to have to fight gravity and run uphill. So if I were to open it and not do anything about this angle, everything would pool here at the low point and just kind of stay there. So they do make a device to kind of hold this up like a bridge and let it travel downhill. I didn't bring it with me on this trip, but I'll link it in the description below. But if you're in the situation like I am, you can go ahead and just pull your black tank and then use your arm, your hand, kind of get your contents to flow into the hole against gravity. That's how I do it. Just going to double check this is really in there, and then it's not going to go anywhere. Nice and snug. Once I know for sure it's going to stay on, I can pull my valve and drain my black tank. So you can see it pooling right here in the hose. It's not able to go uphill. That's just how gravity works. So when I hear it kind of getting close to the end, you can just give it a little boost and get it all in there. I'm going to let a little more fill the hose, and I'll do that once more. But you'll notice that I'm still hooked up to the fresh water connection. I don't like to leave my black tank dry. I might put just a little more water in there and drop another treatment tab down the toilet so it's ready to go for the next trip. But you do want to flush your black tank occasionally. So when you have full hookups like this, a really easy way to flush your tank is to just go inside, step on the pedal, and let a ton of water run into your toilet, and then do this exact process again. You can fill it up halfway or a quarter way or whatever you feel like you need to do based on the dirtiness of your holding tank, and then just dump that water right out, and that'll flush anything that might have got left behind. So you can have a problem with your sensors. If toilet paper gets stuck to them, they won't read the fill level correctly. It can say that it's full even when it's empty. So there's a product you can use to clean your sensors, but flushing your black tank regularly will really help with that. Or some people don't put their TP into their black tank. They put it in a trash can nearby. If you're only using your trailer bathroom for number one, then that's not really that gross. You can just put your TP to the side. You avoid the whole sensor fiasco. But if you're putting TP and multiple forms of waste into your black tank, then rinsing and flushing your black tank is crucial, or else you'll get smells, bad sensors, a whole lot of mess. So flush it regularly. Camco does make an elbow where you can see when this is done draining, and you can see how clean it's coming out when you flush it. But it also has a connection that you can attach a hose to, and you can blast water in from this side. I would definitely not use my drinking water hose for that. I would get a separate hose for that, but that's something that I usually carry. I just don't have it with me on this trip. But it's a good way to see when your tank is thoroughly rinsed and flushed, and you can kind of see the color of the contents coming out, and that'll help you know the state of your black tank. So now I'm just going to close my flush valve. I'm going to remove my stinky slinky. Make sure I put that cap back on, and I can move on to my gray tank. So now I'm hooked up to my gray tank waste port, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, that's one of the reasons that I like to leave the contents inside instead of leaving this hooked up and letting it drain out. One, it's running uphill at this campsite, but two, I want to have plenty of contents to be able to flush out any food particles that might have got stuck in there, and also give this hose a really good cleaning. So if I have a ton of gray water in there, it's going to flush this hose out, and it's going to be a lot less dirty and smelly when I go to use it next time. So I'm just going to double check that I still have a good connection over here. And again, I'm going uphill, so I'm going to have to give it a little bit of help. But gray tank next. Pull the valve. Something else I should mention is when you level your trailer, if you leave this side a little lower than the other side, it helps drain the tanks. If you leave this side higher, then stuff can pool in the back side of your tank and not empty completely. So when I was leveling, I put a little higher on that side just because I knew I was going to be dumping my tanks before I left, and that kind of helps facilitate a good dump. Ooh, getting stuck. Better help it. it's definitely not preferable to dump your tanks uphill like I'm doing here. If I wasn't making this video, I probably just would have hitched up and used the dump site on the way out of the campground. They have one for general use because there are sites here that don't have full hookups. So I would have normally gone over there to dump. It would have been a lot easier and I wouldn't have to fight gravity. But because I'm making the video, I wanted to be able to take my time. So if you find yourself in a situation like this, easy fix. Get one of those hose holders that elevates it and leaves it at the right angle, or just use your hands. Close my valve, take my hose off, catch any drips, put my cap back on. Raise my hose up, make sure all the water dumps out. Put the side in first that doesn't have the connector. It can be a little drippy, that's why I like to wear gloves. And then once I've got that in there, and I put this back on, I twist and line up these holes here so I can put my O-ring carabiner through here, my O-shaped carabiner through here, and close that so it doesn't come off on the highway. That's just something that I do out of an abundance of caution because I've heard a lot of stories where this comes off and hoses come out and you lose them and they're hard to replace because it's a particular size. So that's something I do to make sure mine doesn't get lost. So those are the basics you need to know to use the plumbing in your Scamp and use your water heater. I hope that answered any questions that you have. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video. And I want to say an extra special thank you for those of you who've been using my tip jar. I post that in the description of all my videos, and a few of you have been using it. And the money you so generously gave me there went directly to getting this campsite to make this video. So I want to let you know that your support helps make more content. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for your generous support. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out some other ones while you're here. I'll see you in the next one.